morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Stephen Riddick, and I am the VP of Sales and Marketing here at CSP. Today, we're very excited. We're kicking off our 2018 webinar series, which is an awesome event. We have two great industry experts joining us to discuss cyber risk, specifically from an insurance perspective. So I have seen the presentations, and I'm sure you will love it. Before we dive in, however, I would like to touch on a few brief housekeeping items as well as some introductions. First, thanks again for joining us. I know your time is extremely valuable, so we always want to respect it and also make these as valuable as we possibly can. We received great feedback last year and tweaked our future content accordingly, but we're always open for other ideas on improvement, topics you would like to see, things that are interesting to you. So please reach out, and we do take that feedback extremely seriously. Second, while I was looking at the attendee list this morning, and while I know some of you, there are a few new names as well. Thus, I would like to very briefly introduce CSP. We are a 23-year-old managed IT services and solutions firm based here in Raleigh, North Carolina. I'm very blessed to have so many great awards, accolades, great clients, and we just absolutely love doing what we do. We have three main focuses of our business. One, managed IT services, so really supporting your organization from end to end. However you may need support, we're here to help. Our cloud services division has been one of our fastest growing portions of our business the past few years. And then finally, our technology solutions, which are more on-prem classic technology solutions. And obviously, one of the biggest underpinnings with that has been growth in our IT security practice, hands down, far and away, our largest growth area of the past year or so. So something that is very near and dear to our heart, and thus one reason I'm very excited to have these gentlemen joining us today to continue that discussion. So with that, I'd say a good segue and transition onto the topic at hand today. Cybersecurity has obviously become just such a big buzz in the industry. It's impossible to turn on the news without seeing a headline. At CSP, our approach to IT security is all about creating layers of defense and multiple layers of defense. And while we introduced many new security solutions in 2017, we're definitely happy to discuss those. We view our security as an insurance policy of sorts, but at the same time, I'm extremely excited to have two fantastic experts to join us to discuss cyber risk from the viewpoint of the insurance industry. I mean, we view these protections and policies as going hand in hand. Just as if you had fire insurance, you'll still want fire alarms. And I think the same analogy can be given here when it comes to cyber risk and how you're protecting yourself from those cyber risks. So I think it'll be a perfect complement to the discussions we're having. So with that said, I'd love to introduce Albie Knight with Independent Insurance Agents in North Carolina, and Eddie Chang with Travelers. On a personal note, I can vouch for both as we're represented by an ANC member here from an insurance perspective, and we actually started leveraging Travelers for cybersecurity policies before it was even the cool thing to do. I think in our business, we've gone way back with them. So been two great relationships there. Professionally, both these gentlemen just have immaculate credentials, years of experience, Stanford diplomas, law degrees, list goes on and on. So again, thank you so much for your time. Enjoy the presentation, and Albie, on that, I will turn it over to you.
Very good. Thank you so much, and good morning, everyone. I am Albie Knight. I'm the CEO of the Independent Insurance Agents of North Carolina. We are a 120-year-old organization. We represent independent business owners that happen to be insurance agents across the state. We've got members in all 100 counties, and they're spread out geographically very much in line with the population density of the state. Our members, we have 900 members in North Carolina. We work very closely with all sorts of entities. The independent agency system insures in North Carolina about a 30% market share of personal lines insurance. So personal lines is an area where the exclusive or the captive agents still maintain a predominant market share, but where our members really dominate in the marketplace is on the business insurance side, on the commercial line side. Our members insure over 80% of the businesses in North Carolina. So we dominate in the commercial line space and helping business owners find the right insurance solutions for their individual situations. Our members are trusted choice independent insurance agents. We have the very unique ability to represent multiple insurance companies, which allows our member agents to take care of more complicated risk such as a lot of business insurance needs. It also allows our members to serve clients effectively throughout their life cycle. As you're a young person, you have a different set of needs as you do when you become a business owner, and then you have a different set of needs after you retire. And so throughout the life cycle, the ability to represent multiple insurance companies, such as the Travelers, is a really unique benefit that we have in the marketplace. We're able to shop insurance providers and provide you with greater choice. Additionally, our members are professionals, and they're going to help you understand how to mitigate risk and manage risk through other loss control and risk management techniques other than the purchasing of insurance. So like the comment that was made earlier, loss control and risk management, all of these things do go hand in hand. And certainly there are portions of risk that every organization has that you're going to want to transfer and use the financing technique of an insurance policy. So that's my introduction. And I would like to, at this point in time, introduce Eddie Chang, because he's the real subject matter expert in this area. I normally don't make a point to read bios kind of word for word, but I think that Eddie's bio is so impressive, and particularly as it relates to this topic, that you'll want to hear this. So Eddie Chang is a second VP for cyber risk management at the Travelers companies, where he is involved in underwriting, risk control, and catastrophe analysis for the company's cyber insurance products. Before joining the Travelers in February, Eddie was a federal prosecutor in the Southern District of New York and the District of Connecticut, where he was focused on prosecuting Romanian fishers, Nigerian fraudsters, and other sundry cyber criminals. In 2015, he received the Director's Award for Superior Performance by an assistant U.S. attorney in connection with the extradition and prosecution of 13 defendants from Romania, Bulgaria, Sweden, and Canada who had been engaged in a phishing conspiracy. In 2012, he and his team were awarded the Attorney General's Distinguished Service Award for successfully executing the first U.S. law enforcement effort against a botnet. He was previously employed by the Microsoft Corporation as a software development engineer and its advanced technology division. He received a PhD in computer science in 1994 from Stanford University and a JD in 1998 from the Yale Law School. So without any further ado, Eddie, I'll turn it over to you, and we look forward to hearing your remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Aubie, and thank you, Steve, for the two of you giving me an opportunity to come and present as part of your webinar today. I really appreciate it, and I appreciate the time that everybody on the audience is giving us. So my role at Travelers is, Aubie mentioned, I'm involved in cyber risk management, and basically the idea there is that not only do we want to be helping provide that financial backstop of insurance in case a bad event occurs, a bad cyber event, but we also want to be trying to help our customers reduce their exposure to cyber risks, to manage those risks. And so what I'm going to be doing today during this webinar is trying to lay out some of the ways that computer hackers get in to corporate networks and to businesses' computers, and what businesses can do to try to prevent that and to mitigate the risk of that actually happening. So let's start with the cyber threat landscape. If you read the papers, you'll see often stories about cyber risk, about cyber incidents, and they have all kinds of things going on, whether it's talking about social engineering, ransomware, spear phishing, all the way up to things like SQL injections and more complicated attacks like that. But really what I want to focus on today is to try to simplify that a little bit and address how do the bad guys get into the systems and what do they do once they get in there. The magnitude of this problem is severe. Anybody who has been paying attention realizes that businesses are constantly under threat of cyber attack. There are stories that we see in the papers and that we know firsthand here in the insurance industry with our customers getting breached and losing significant amounts of money. I can tell you that when I was a prosecutor, since Aubie was kind enough to bring up my history, here in Connecticut, we had an incident where a large company in Connecticut lost 8 figures. So that was over $10 million as a result of a computer financial fraud. So these losses obviously are the kinds of losses that can cripple a business. So businesses really need to focus on what they should be doing from a technology perspective to stay protected, as well as from an insurance perspective. So let's get right into it. Now, when people think about cyber vulnerabilities, I think a lot of times it's at the level of, hey, I've got antivirus and I've got firewalls, and so I really think that I'm as protected as I reasonably can be. And why is that not true? Like, how are the bad guys getting through? The important thing to realize is, even though I'm going to be talking about how the criminals are getting through firewalls and antivirus, you still have to have these technologies, right? The analogy is you don't want to be the house with the unlocked door. You don't want to be the car in the city that has valuables lying out in plain sight. So we're going to talk about how the criminals are defeating these technologies, but you have to understand that it's critically important to have the defensive technologies and to have them deployed properly. So let's start by talking about malware, viruses, Trojans, ransomware. There's a huge volume of this criminal software that's out there on the internet. The statistics show in 2016 there were something like 357 million variants of malware that were discovered in 2016 alone. How is that possible? Well, the answer is that the criminals are out there modifying existing malware quickly to try to defeat your antivirus programs and systems. So you may have antivirus and you may be updating your antivirus regularly, hopefully at least daily. It should be automatically updating. But if the criminals happen to put out a new version of a malware that just comes out right after you've updated, you might be vulnerable. So how quickly are they doing this? This is a graph that came out last year from Cisco, one of the big network appliance vendors. And this graph shows that for periods of last year, towards the end of last year, the criminals were updating their malware on a less than daily basis. They were every day, more often than once a day, they were updating their malware. So you can see how quickly the criminals are changing their attack methods in order to get past antivirus. If you think that you've got antivirus and you're 100% protected, this is why that might not be true, because if they happen to slide one in past your latest update, it may get through. Now, how are they getting the malware to your systems? The answer is it's either going to be primarily email or from a web-based attack. And let's talk about both of those. The other primary defense that people talk about in addition to antivirus is firewalls. Well, firewalls don't actually defend against email and web traffic because most companies want to allow our employees to use email and to use the web. So firewalls are configured to allow email and web traffic through. So when a criminal sends a malware attachment by email, it's not going to get blocked by the firewall, and if it happens to get through the antivirus, then it's going to end up with one of your employees and be a potential risk. We can see from the statistics that the volume of malware that is coming in through email is increasing over the past few years, up to 1 in 131 in 2016. So in addition to the antivirus, in addition to the firewalls, critically important to also have email content controls to make sure that your emails are being and trying to put another layer of protection between your employees, your networks, your data, and the bad guys. Now, we also know that email is a source of not just malware, but it's also being used significantly for fraud. And these are the types of fraud that I mentioned earlier, where companies can lose millions of dollars and be put out of business if they're compromised. And what the FBI calls these scams is business email compromise, BEC. And there are many different variations on how a business email compromise scam works. But in essence, the criminals are either pretending to be or they're actually in a business's email computer systems, and they're sending fake email messages to trick people in the company to send money to the wrong place. So here's a classic example. If you have a vendor that provides services to your company, the criminals are aware of that relationship because they can get into your email and they see it, or they just know that you have that relationship. They would send a fake email message to your accounts payable department, pretending to be that vendor, and asking that payments be redirected to the wrong bank account. And if your accounts payable department doesn't catch the mistake, the money gets sent out, it gets transferred quickly overseas, and it's lost. And that's actually how that $10 million plus loss happened in the case I'm aware of. This is the kind of fraud loss that we're seeing very frequently in the insurance space. And obviously the FBI is telling us that there's been a huge increase in these types of scams over the past couple of years. In addition to fraud attacks through business email compromise schemes, we also know that criminals are sending malicious links by email. Now, these malicious links they used to be really traditional phishing. So the idea with phishing, we all know, is you get a link, maybe from your bank, and you traverse the link, and the bank, it takes you to a fake website where you're asked for your bank account credentials or your bank account passwords, other kinds of personal information, whether it's date of birth or social security numbers. And that's the traditional classic phishing scheme that we're all familiar with and aware of, hopefully. So what are the bad guys doing now? They are actually using newer types of phishing attacks. They start out looking similar to the old attacks. You will get an email message. So here's an email message that I just drummed up that refers to the recent Meltdown Spectre vulnerabilities, but doesn't really have to be anything. It's just anything that will persuade an employee to click on the link. So here, this email is asking them to download something that doesn't exist called My Perfect Scanner. And My Perfect Scanner would be something that the bad guys actually created. But instead of going to a page that asks for information, like social security numbers or bank account credentials, it's going to go to this familiar kind of thing. We've all seen these very convenient web pages where you can use a Google email address to access other websites, right? Or you can use your Facebook credentials to access a variety of different websites. Well, this new convenient way of sharing authentication is now being used by the bad guys, because what they'll do is they'll create something called, in this example, My Perfect Scanner. And if your employee is persuaded to use a Google account to access My Perfect Scanner, they will be asked, okay, now you've authenticated, do you want to allow My Perfect Scanner to read, delete, and manage your email? And if they allow this, then now the malicious application My Perfect Scanner would have access to all of their emails. And that would be a perfect way to get in and start performing some of these email attacks. So this particular attack is a fairly new attack. It's an evolution in the phishing attacks that we're all familiar with. But the interesting thing about this attack is not only does this attack get through the antivirus and the firewalls, it also defeats multi-factor authentication. So we're all familiar with the idea that sometimes when we log into an account, hopefully your bank account, you're asked to type in a number that you received by text message, right? So you can't log in just by a password. You actually have a second form of authentication, like you're having your cell phone to receive a text message. That's multi-factor authentication. With this new phishing attack, the criminals are actually able to bypass multi-factor authentication because the victim authenticates that they want to allow My Perfect Scanner to have access to the email. Once this happens, the criminals have access to the emails, and they're able to conduct some of those earlier business email compromise schemes that I mentioned. So the attacks are constantly evolving. If we look beyond email attacks, let's take a look at the web. When employees browse the web, it's a really kind of scary statistic that came out in the Internet Security Threat Report last year that they've been tracking website vulnerabilities. Last year, the report was that about 75% of scanned websites, 3 out of every 4 websites out there, has a vulnerability. Out of all the websites, 10% of those have critical vulnerabilities. In other words, vulnerabilities that would allow an attacker to run malicious code on a website that one of your employees might be visiting. So that's a way that the bad guys are able to get in. If they can compromise a website that one of your employees might visit, then that's a way to download code to your employee's computer. A watering hole attack is another way that the bad guys are able to use the internet to get onto victim computers. The way a watering hole attack works is basically, we're all familiar with the idea that when you visit a website, oftentimes you'll see advertising on the page. In this example, it's a fictitious furniture store, and you can see advertising at the bottom of the page for some other, lifestyle type things. Now, this furniture store isn't actually out there selling advertisements for its website. It's using an intermediary known as a third-party advertising network. And the third-party advertising network sells ad placements and then puts those ads on different websites. Now, the problem is that the third-party advertising networks don't always manage, catch, or screen for malware. So the bad guys know this, and so they just have to pay a third-party advertising network to place a malicious ad. Now, they don't know which website their malicious ad will get placed on, but as long as the third-party advertising network places it on a website, then people who visit that website would be exposed to the advertisement and be exposed to the malicious advertisement. So you can see that this website, this furniture store, wouldn't even have to be compromised. It's an entirely legitimate website, hasn't been compromised, but because it's using a third-party advertising network that allowed malware to get through, that malware can be delivered to your employees if they visit those websites. The last thing I think it's really important to understand about how the criminals are getting through our defenses, that even when we have firewalls and intrusion detection systems and email content filtering, these systems generate a lot of data, a lot of alerts. And many companies really don't have the resources to filter through all of those alerts and all of that data. So this is, again, some information from the annual cybersecurity report put out by Cisco last year. And it's amazing, frankly, that 56% of the alerts that 44% of the alerts that companies received are not even investigated. And out of the 56% that are investigated, more than half are not remediated. So the IT teams don't have the adequate resources to investigate the alerts or even to fix the underlying issues they do investigate. So that's a huge problem, right? So if you have the right technology in place, the next question has to be, do you have the adequate staffing in place to make use of that technology? Next thing, let's take a look. What do the bad guys do once they get onto a system? And from the insurance perspective, I'll tell you, as I mentioned earlier, we're seeing two things. We're seeing the financial fraud, and we're also seeing ransomware. Now, ransomware made the news last year with the WannaCry attacks and NotPetya attacks. But the important thing to understand is that those were just two prominent newsworthy attacks, probably because they utilized an exploit that was stolen from our national security agency. That was a big part of the newsworthiness of those attacks. But in fact, there is an enormous amount of ransomware out there, and we see companies that are being hit by ransomware and victimized by ransomware of all different strains and all different types. According to the statistics, Symantec tells us that there were 101 new families of ransomware last year. So that means that actual new ransomware software, not just fiddling around with the code to try to avoid antivirus. It's an enormously profitable area for criminals to get into, and it's an area where there's constantly new software developments and criminal groups working. Why does this matter from a business owner's perspective? I mean, obviously you don't want to get hit by ransomware, but the real problem for a business owner is all of these different forms of ransomware and the criminal groups that are using them have different properties. It is not one size fits all if you are hit with ransomware. Consider this. Some ransomware is poorly written. And, if you have a competent expert, they can actually go through, defeat the ransomware, defeat the encryption, and get your data back without paying the ransomware. Other forms of ransomware, it's completely impossible to do that. If you had the resources of the FBI at your disposal, you wouldn't be able to break the encryption. So as a business owner, how do you know which kind of ransomware you've been hit with? Another feature of ransomware is that they often put a time limit. They often require you to make payment within 72 hours, where they claim they will delete all your data permanently. So the question is, do you actually have to pay that ransom within 72 hours, or can you negotiate? That's one of these areas where you need to have the expertise available to know whether the criminal group that's responsible for that malware is willing to negotiate the price, or whether you really do need to pay within 72 hours or not. So you can see that the enormous volume of different types of ransomware and the different types of criminals that are out there would make it very hard for a business owner to know what to do if they were hit by ransomware. Now, there's no one-size-fits-all answer to the question. The business owners really need access to the experts. Some considerations that the FBI has put out there with respect to ransomware are as follows. They warn that business owners should be cautious about paying ransomware, because even if you pay ransom, you may not get the encryption keys to decrypt your data. So that's another question. Are the criminals honorable criminals? Are they going to be giving you the decryption keys back? The other problem with paying ransom is that if you pay the ransom, it basically tells the criminals that you don't have adequate backup. Because if you had adequate backups, you would just back up the files that you'd lost and you wouldn't pay the ransom. So if you don't have adequate backups, the criminals know that you're vulnerable to ransomware and you're at risk of being hit again. The best advice really for a company that's hit with ransomware is to consult experienced legal counsel, something that we in the insurance industry refer to as a breach coach. Decide whether it's a form of ransomware that can't be beaten, so you have to pay the ransom, and whether the criminals will actually give you the encryption keys back if you pay the ransom, and how much room you have to negotiate. Now, it's important also to understand that crime is just one of the risks that business owners face. These are some headlines from 1 or 2 years ago referring to non-criminal related business interruption losses that companies faced as a result of computers going down or service providers going down, right? So if you are a business that relies heavily on Amazon Web Services, for example, or any other service provider and their servers go down, how would it impact your e-commerce site? How is it going to impact your ability to do business? That's an important cyber risk that companies need to consider as well when evaluating how exposed they are. The airlines glitch, there have been a number of airlines glitches that have happened in the past couple of years. Probably one of the most prominent involved Southwest Airlines. In that case, Southwest Airlines had a single network router fail in one of its facilities in Texas. And as a result of this failure of a single network appliance, their entire operations were shut down for several days and disrupted for probably close to a week. How dependent is your business on any single point of failure? Is there a particular computer or server or data system database that would cause your business to go down for a week if it were to be lost? That's an important risk that companies need to be thinking about and planning for. So when companies are compromised, what kind of information is lost and what are the consequences? I think by now we're all familiar with the idea that there is something called personally identifiable information, typically social security numbers, driver's licenses, names, addresses, phone numbers, that kind of thing. All of that is protected by law. There's something called protected health information. We're all familiar with that when we go to our doctor's offices and we sign the HIPAA releases that define exactly what can and cannot be done with our medical information. Obviously, there's payment card information. We see that in a lot of the large breaches where retailers are losing or having criminals access their credit card data of their customers. But we also have to realize there's other private or confidential information. So, for example, you may have data from your business partners, confidential business information of your own company that shouldn't be out there. And all of this is potentially exposed when criminals are able to access a company's computer network. When that happens, what are the legal consequences and why is it so bad when companies are breached? One significant problem is that there are 48 different state laws that address the loss of PII, personally identifiable information. There's not one single law that companies can look to when something happens to say, okay, what are my obligations and when do I have to provide notification and how do I provide notification? Instead, if a company is doing business in multiple states or is collecting information or has information about customers from multiple states, they're potentially at risk of being subject to the state laws of all of the states in which they're doing business. And those state laws vary quite considerably in terms of what exactly constitutes a data breach, when notification has to be made, and what are the deadlines for making notification. California actually has a form that companies need to use which specify exactly what has to be in a data breach notification. So it can be quite complicated for companies to know how to respond when an incident occurs. Beyond state laws, there are also specialized federal laws for companies that do business in certain areas or that hold certain kinds of data. So, for example, businesses that are financial institutions would be subject to the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act. Businesses that handle healthcare information, obviously I mentioned earlier, are subject already to HIPAA. Pretty much any business that has a website is potentially subject to the jurisdiction of the FTC with respect to any privacy policies on that website. So if a business has a privacy policy on its website in which the business says, we will not share your data with anybody else, but then they go ahead and do that, that is the type of misconduct or alleged misconduct that the Federal Trade Commission might investigate as an unfair trade practice. And so you can see that that kind of thing essentially is a potential exposure for any business that has a website or that puts out any information about what it's doing with the data that it collects. Beyond that, there's contract laws. So PCI, the payment card industry, is probably the most well-known of the contract-based regulations. Basically, businesses that are dealing with payment cards, Visas or MasterCard, American Express, they're entering into contracts with their acquiring banks about how they're going to protect that data and how that data is going to be used. So if that data is lost and they did not protect it adequately, businesses can be subject to fines and assessments by the acquiring bank. So think about this. I think it often takes small business owners by surprise. If they've been victimized, a small business owner has been the victim of a cyber attack, they lose payment card data, their acquiring bank could contractually come after them for losses that this bank has suffered because of the loss of this payment card data. So a small business might be liable to a large bank as a result of not adequately protecting payment card information. Something that I think a lot of small business owners don't necessarily think about, but it's important to understand that potential liability, both in terms of understanding what needs to be protected and how to protect against that possible risk if it should happen to you through insurance. I mentioned earlier the 48 different state laws and how difficult it would be for a business to deal with a multi-state problem. The other thing is that you can't even just read the state law to figure out what you're expected to do. Let's take a look at Connecticut state law, which updated its privacy data breach notification statute fairly recently. And in the update, the law says that companies have up to 90 days to make consumer notification if something happens. Well, interestingly enough, the Attorney General of Connecticut came out with a press release that said, even though the law says 90 days, we are reserving the right to take action against the company if we think that waiting 90 days was unreasonable. So the 90-day deadline in the statute is not something that companies can entirely rely on. They need to know that the regulators are construing that very strictly and are going to be more aggressive than the actual statute provides for. In the same statute, it provides that if a company is breached, they may have to provide up to 1 year identity theft protection. The Attorney General for Connecticut said that is not sufficient. In certain cases, that the Attorney General will be looking for up to 2 years of protection for identity theft. So the message here really is that the legal framework surrounding data privacy is so complicated and is changing so quickly that it's a challenge for companies to know what to do and how to respond if they are the victim of a data breach. So we're going to turn now to cyber insurance, because hopefully shown to you or conveyed to you the idea that no matter how strong a company's cyber defenses are, they are potentially at risk of a cyber incident. And so for a company to really protect itself in this kind of a challenging environment, it's important not just to have strong cyber security, but also to have cyber insurance as a financial backstop to protect a company in case something happens. We've all heard the trope that there are two types of companies in the world, those that have been breached and those that will be breached. Sometimes it's those that haven't breached and those that don't know they've been breached. But in either case, companies want to think about having some additional protection beyond having the best possible technical security measures available. So cybersecurity and cyber insurance is the best way for companies to ensure that they're resilient in this kind of an environment. So what does cyber insurance cover? I'll go over these different coverages fairly quickly, but I think the most important message to get across is, as has already been said, cyber insurance is a fairly fluid and quick changing marketplace. The coverages are still developing and they're changing, and it's important for companies to have a trusted advisor that they can turn to understand what insurance product would best fit their needs. Having said that, let's go over some of the coverages that are pretty traditionally found in cyber insurance products, as well as some of the newer coverages that we're starting to see in the marketplaces today. We'll start with crisis management. The idea there, obviously, is that companies, when faced with a cyber incident, can often face adverse press, adverse media reports. And so being able to go out there and trying to minimize the impact of a cyber incident from a PR perspective is what crisis management is all about. Remediation and notification is probably the biggest and most important bucket as far as the first-party response costs that a company would face. This is where a company would have access to digital forensics experts who can come in and evaluate what the criminals have done on the network, how much data they've gotten, and what the company needs to do to recover. This is also the coverage that provides the expertise to understand if you've been hit by ransomware, what variant of ransomware have you been hit with? Should you pay the ransom or can you break it? And do we have the opportunity to negotiate with these people, or are they just going to delete your data if you don't pay up? This is where that expertise lies. It also provides the expertise to understand the legal ramifications of a data breach. This is where you have access to the data breach, the lawyers who specialize in privacy events every single day. This remediation and notification also includes, obviously, the cost of making notification, if the notification has to be made under a state law, as well as providing call centers or providing for credit or identity theft monitoring services if those need to be provided to the individuals whose data has been lost. Cyber insurance also has several fraud-related coverages, including computer fraud. Somebody hacks into a corporate network and transfers money out from companies' bank accounts. That's computer fraud. Funds transfer fraud is another coverage where if a company's financial institution to make a payment and that payment is made from the company's accounts, that would be funds transfer fraud. And social engineering fraud, this is what I was referring to earlier with the business email compromise. That's where an employee is tricked into sending money out and is deceived through a form of social engineering to make a payment that shouldn't be made. So the interesting thing there really about the fraud coverages is that many of those coverages can also be found in crime policies, in commercial crime policies. So it's really an area where you do need help with the trusted advisor to make sure that you don't have a gap in coverage, to make sure that you've got the right fraud coverages either in your cyber policy or your crime policy. The next one, extortion ransomware, that is actually payment for the ransom. So if you are compromised by ransomware and the criminals are demanding 3 Bitcoins in order to get your data back, and at today's prices, 3 Bitcoins could be $20,000, $21,000, something like that, then the extortion and ransomware payment coverage actually would pay for that payment. It would help the company obtain the Bitcoins that are needed to make that payment, and so on. Now, an area where cyber insurance coverage is very quickly developing is in the area of business interruption. Basic business interruption coverage means that if a hacker gets into a company's network or a computer system and causes damage to that network and computer system that would result in a loss to the business's income, that business income loss would be covered. That is an area of coverage that has been very quickly evolving. So some time ago, they added contingent business interruption. In other words, if there is a third-party provider, a web services provider, a web hosting company that a business is using, and there's a failure at the web hosting company that causes the e-commerce site to go down, that is a business interruption at a provider that the business is dependent on. So that is a contingent business interruption loss. System failure is an interesting coverage that's been developing as well. So system failure, the idea is if your system fails not because of a hacker, but because of an error on the part of one of your employees, or frankly anything else almost, that could potentially be a basis for system failure coverage. Now, where have we seen that really recently? We saw that really recently with the Spectre and Meltdown vulnerabilities. The Spectre and Meltdown vulnerabilities resulted in patches being put out on a very urgent basis, but unfortunately, the patches had an impact on the performance of some of the computers, and in fact, they caused some computers to crash. So the scenario would go like this. If a company had installed a patch that it received from the manufacturer, and the patch caused the company's failures or caused the company's networks or systems to go down, then that company could rely on its system failure coverage to recover for any business interruption losses that it might have suffered. So that's interesting there. No hacker needed. It's almost kick the cord coverage. If one of your employees kicks the cord out and causes a system failure, then there's coverage. And finally, reputational harm. This is probably the newest of the business interruption coverages. The idea here is that if a business relies heavily on consumers' customer base, then a data breach can have a significant impact on its business because fewer customers will be willing to go. Think about a restaurant that suffered a data breach and lost payment card information. A lot of the restaurant's patrons might choose to go to a different restaurant for a little while. That difference in income is covered by the reputational harm coverage. Finally, very quickly, the third-party coverages protect the business from getting sued in the event of a data breach, some kind of a defamation that might be inadvertently put out on its website. If a company has a website and they put out some copyrighted image and they're sued, that's what a third-party coverage would protect against. The third one is regulatory liability. As I mentioned, there are many, many government agencies that are out there, the 48 different state entities that are looking at data breaches. When companies are investigated or sued as a result of data breaches, the regulatory liability provides coverage there. Important to understand, and this is near and dear to my heart, is that cyber insurance, good cyber insurance, should provide more than just a financial backstop. It should be providing ways for companies to try to reduce the risk of being compromised, what we refer to as risk management. This is an example of the Travelers eRisk Hub, where we offer things like a cyber risk assessment. We offer coaching services to our customers. We offer training courses so that companies can provide cybersecurity awareness training to their employees, and all kinds of pre-breach services that will hopefully help companies avoid being compromised, therefore make them a better risk for us and make their business stronger than otherwise would be. So with that, let me turn this back over to Aubie, who can hopefully tell you a little bit about how to find a cyber insurance expert to help you find the best product that will suit your needs.
Yeah, thanks for a great presentation. Very informative. We have a website, surprisingly enough, www.trustedchoice.com. You can go there and enter some very basic information in order to find a Trusted Choice insurance agent near you that has the expertise to work with the type of insurance that you're looking for. So you can see on the screen, you find insurance for my business, just ask you a couple of questions, and then we can match you up with a Trusted Choice independent insurance agent in your community. Maybe someone you're already dealing with, or someone that you've heard of, because they're typically very engaged in the community and folks that you'll know. So with that, we'll see if you guys have any questions, and we'll be happy to answer any.
Well, great. And really quick, sorry, Clayton, before you dive into questions, everybody, this is Stephen again. Many, many thanks. Great job, Eddie and Aubie. Really appreciate all your content. Finally, from the CSP perspective too, I'd be remiss today is not a sales pitch, but how else can you minimize your risk? As Eddie mentioned in there, it really is balancing both the insurance but also your cybersecurity protections. We've invested heavily in a full suite of IT security solutions to help minimize that risk. Definitely not hitting on all of them today, but do highly believe in multiple layers of defense are paramount. So please reach out and we'd be happy to discuss those with you. And finally, I'd like to leave everybody just with a challenge today. And that is to start having the dialogue and just start having the conversation. I fully understand that talking about some of these topics can be scary. There can be technical in sense, talking about some of the darker sides of the web, things that you might not know about. And I fully understand that there can be a hesitancy there to really dive into where your exposures are, where your risk is. But again, I would just challenge everybody to say the risks are real. So start the conversation, ask the conversations, come to us, come to any of the Trusted Choice partners, and let's see what we can do to help secure your business and mitigate those risks. And so, yes, with that, would like to give one final thank you for your time today. We really do appreciate everyone taking a few minutes out of your busy day to join us. And we did want to leave a few minutes at the end for questions. So Clayton, I will turn it back over to you for any questions that may have come in during the course of the webinar.
Excellent. Here's our first question that we have today. This is coming in from Bill. Bill writes, in such a fluid industry with the new types of threats emerging almost daily, how can I be sure that I'll have the coverage for the threats that could hit me?
I think that's a really challenging question, and it's really very heavily going to depend on the nature of your business. From a technology response, I think it's important for business to conduct a risk assessment. That's probably something that CSP could help with, or you to an appropriate person to help with that. From the insurance side of things, I know Aubie can talk about this more, but it's important to find an insurance agent that can help you, once you understand what the technology risks are, can help you find a good product that is going to match up the coverages with the risks that you need to have transferred or to have protected against.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Eddie made that comment in his presentation that this is very much an evolving marketplace. There are new exposures that are popping up all the time. So it's very important to be with someone that understands the coverages, both from a first party and a third party perspective, that the insurance policy will respond to. And then working with your IT provider to make sure that you're mitigating possible risk on the front end as well. I mean, obviously you want to keep the incident from occurring. I mean, that's one of the major points, and then making sure that you have financial backing in the event that one does occur. How do you go about recouping the monetary loss that you're likely to suffer?
Fantastic. So our next question comes in today from Sarah. Sarah writes in, what kind of plans are we seeing in cyber insurance?
There's a myriad of insurance coverages that are out there. And I've made the comment just a minute ago that one of the big distinguishing features are the difference between first party and third party. And let me maybe explain that a little bit. When an insurance policy responds from a first party standpoint, that means paying you back, paying your business back for losses that you suffered due to the data breach. So whether that was the expense to recover data or the expense that might be necessary to notify policyholders. So you had to incur expenses, your business had to incur expenses, and now the insurance policy kind of reimbursing or indemnifying you for those expenses that you incurred. Third party coverage is a type of coverage where you have been found liable for a data breach. Another organization has been harmed. One of your clients was harmed because their data was breached from your system, and now you owe them money. So some insurance policies only cover first party expenses. So they would only cover the cost that you would incur to kind of recover from a data breach. They may not provide third party coverage in terms of paying the other person for the harm that the data breach caused them. So that's an important distinguishing feature about insurance policies, that you'll want to make sure that if you need the first party and third party coverage, that you're buying a policy that would respond in both of those instances.
Yeah, it's also worth looking at whether in terms of types of insurance policies, whether the cyber coverage that you're getting is packaged and kind of just bolted on to maybe your commercial general liability insurance or another policy, because there are standalone cyber insurance policies that are probably more comprehensive. In that slide where I showed things like social media coverage and reputational harm coverage, the more evolving and more expansive coverages are probably not found in the basic cyber coverages that are just add-ons to other policies. Those are probably only found in the standalone policies that are available out there now. One thing to think about is if you are using one of the more limited forms of cyber coverage, is your business sufficiently exposed to cyber risk that would be a good idea to move towards a standalone policy?
That's a great point, Eddie. I mean, there are a lot of carriers that are starting to offer some level of cyber coverage, as Eddie described, as kind of an add-on or a bolt-on, where you might have some limited amount of cyber coverage just with your business owner's package policy. You want to, as a business owner, you want to make sure that you understand the extent of that coverage, because as Eddie mentioned, oftentimes kind of the added on, the bolt-on, or the built-in coverage that might be provided is not going to be very comprehensive, and it's perhaps not going to have very high limits or very comprehensive scope in terms of what's covered. So just because you may see the word, cyber coverage on a policy with some, sublimit of $100,000 or something to that, you'll want to make sure that you dig in a little bit deeper and ask the questions of your trusted choice insurance aid, get to the right answer of exactly the extent of that coverage.
Fantastic. Those are all the questions we do have time for today, unfortunately. But I wanted to say thank you very much for everybody who presented today. It was fantastic. And thank you so much for everybody who joined the webinar. We hope you have a great rest of your day.